Hello, this is Jeff Segor, and this is video 5 on our project to build a website using this recipe manager as an example. So in our last video, we got acquainted with Git. We basically created an association with our project with Git, and when we do the initialization of Git, if we go to where our project is, the initialization we did at this level, at the tutorial. This is our Angular project. It creates this hidden .git folder, and within here there's some important files in here. We may have to become a little familiar with the config file in here later on when we connect this to the GitHub. But just want to let you know that that's what happened. Also, what's interesting is you can actually do all of these actions that we're doing with the git bash and the git GUI from within our editor itself. So if we go to, let's go to the tutorial. And if you click on source control, this, as we make changes in here, this will show up some of the changes and we can do very similar operations that we can using the external tools. Just want to let you know it's an alternative way of doing staging and committing and even publishing the branch. So what I'm going to do is let's go back to running our app. And it's pretty much blank, but I put in a little example. It was going to show example why we use Bootstrap. So at this point now, to run the sort of the proxy server, we do ng-serve. And then this allows us to run this in the debugger. We go into here and we use our launch JSON file. And it brings it up. And I just put some examples here of some HTML. One of the cool things about Bootstrap is that you can do some kind of nifty formatting with just using some of these controls that we have within our tags. So essentially we ripped out the other code that this generated automatically, and at the very top level, this app component, this is where you're seeing this HTML here. So if we erase all that and substitute our own HTML in here and then style it using some of the CSS styling here, this is what will appear. So at this stage here, you're seeing the web page that's associated with code that's in here. Also, there's no real code in here except giving you the title. So what this does is sets the title to recipes. So in any event, let's see what's our next stage here. So I'm going to just kind of show you. Let's bring up our our Git GUI, and let's navigate to our tutorial. So far, this is clean because in the last video, we committed all of the changes. So I'm going to show what happens and why this is useful. If you go into, let's say we're going to remove let's remove this code here. So now if you see this thing here, because we're using ngserve, if we modify and save this, so let's get rid of this example code here and save it. If we now look at our web page, it disappeared because we removed it. And I didn't have to recompile or anything. That's the beauty of using the ngserve debugger. Now if we go to, we'll see a little 1 here. This will actually record the changes that we did. And we can actually go in and discard the changes. That would be equivalent to reverting the changes using the git GUI. So we can either do this. Sure, we want to discard the changes, and it brings it back. So you can make a lot of changes. Let's say you're experimenting with stuff, and it turns out it didn't work out quite the way you wanted it. You can back these changes out, and that is the whole purpose of having, or one of the purposes of having source control. So now if we change this, if we look at, go to our git GUI, and if we do a rescan, this is equivalent to what we saw before. This basically says everything in red here is what's been deleted. And so we can either, we can stage and then commit these changes if we wanted to, which we will actually eventually do. Or we can revert these changes. To do it from here, you would just come into the commit and say revert changes. And now if you go back to this, you'll see that the changes are gone from the source control here. And our code is back in again. So this is really important to always, no matter what you're doing with code, is to have it attached to some sort of source control. So what I'm going to do is the next step is actually going to create these 2 indexes, one for the recipe and one for the inventory. And I've already got some schema that already exists. Now in here, like I said, I can kill this process here by doing a Control-C. I can even stop the debugger. If I stop the debugger, it kills the HTML window that we had there. So if I switch to this sort of previously worked on, I'm going to go into this. Now what's cool is you can actually go into your Windows directory, right? This kind of represents your directory scheme, but it's actually kind of fake. If I do a right click and say reveal in folder, it'll bring up a Windows Explorer folder. And what I want to do is I want to copy this folder to our tutorial. And I'm going to be putting it in, I'm going to put it at this level. I want this to be sort of detached from the recipes folder. Now if we go back to our tutorial, that folder should exist in the schema. And you'll notice if we go to our source control, it says 2. We've got 2 items that haven't been checked in. So this will be the next stage of check-ins that we're going to be doing. And what I'm going to do is probably track them per video. So when we make changes to the code, I'll add a tag probably at the end of the video so that you can actually go back and see what state we're at. Again, these tabs allow you to see your code, make that disappear. These are individual files that we're looking at. You can, if you want, you can do a right click on here and close all the tabs that you have. If you want to be able to compare, you can use this in here, and it gives you two screens. So if you're trying to refer to some code in here, so I could have different tabs in here, and so that's very handy. Now, right now, this is computer was brought up from was rebooted, so I don't have my Elasticsearch instance running, and I don't have Kibana running. So to review how to do that, you bring up a command prompt, and we first run Elasticsearch. That's in our applications. So run this. As we had mentioned before, this is what's considered a node. And this brings up our database. With another command line, separate one, we're going to bring up Kibana, because we're going to actually create the indexes or indices. And oops, and I want to go to the version 8. And launch that. Then I'm going to bring up a browser window. And I've got to remember the password that's associated with the Elastic account. Got that stored away somewhere. So we're going to be using this. Takes a little bit for Kibana to kick off, a little bit longer than. And we'll go to a website. Let's go to Google here. And if you remember, launching Kibana is at localhost at 5601. And it's not up yet. So we can see we don't have any log messages yet. So here it comes. There it goes. So now we've got Elastic. Now there's two areas. As I had mentioned before, there's lots of fancy stuff, but I'm going to be using the dev tools part. So drop this down. And this brings up a little window where I can do what's called REST commands. And so I've got some predefined to set up the schema of each of this. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of why it works, because I want to just kind of move ahead. You know, there might be a separate video for that. There's also online stuff at the Elasticsearch or the Elastic site. So what I'm going to do is go to, if I can find it. I'm going to go to my schema, and I'm going to create the recipe index first. And there's two parts to it. First part is to create a settings. Now, all this fancy stuff has to do with, I usually do this in the settings. You don't have to. You could have a much simpler settings. I do this because eventually I may make use of these analyzers. So this is a sort of a custom analyzer. So I'm going to pull this in, and I'm going to use this put command. This is all JSON. And I'm going to go back to here. And I'm not going to use this. I'm going to copy this in here. And if there's no errors, you should see no red squigglies. And I'm going to execute this command. And this will be the beginning of this recipe index. It says true, everything worked. Okay, fine. So the next part is actually finding all the fields and what the fields mean. So if we go back to here, down below here, I'm going to do another put res command. Copy that. Put that into here. And just briefly, what this indicates is you can kind of see these correspond. I'm setting properties within this index. So I'm creating a name field. I'm creating a meal type field. And it has different analyzers depending on how I want to do searching. So link name, link source, notes. The analyzer, sometimes if you add a different analyzer other than the standard, you can get some cool things when you're actually searching because it uses the English language for the search. Ingredients is going to be actually a collection, a list of items. So this is how you create a list. So it's sort of like a sub list within here, and instructions is also a list. So that's kind of different than the way you set this up. So now I just hit this and acknowledge true. So now we've got our recipes index defined, and we can start putting in records. And I have some predefined recipes that I have, and I'll show you how you can do that using a batch mode. Now, is there a way of seeing, all the indices that we've created? Yes, there is. If we go to this panel here and say manage spaces and look at index management, we should see this is all kind of the default when you create Cabana for the first time that we're not using but are defined when. Now you'll notice that the health of this is yellow, and that's largely because this will create shards, but we don't have necessarily replicas for all of our shards. So if we created a separate machine on a different computer, create a separate node, and then define in our configuration file that we've actually got a cluster, then this would eventually turn green. So if, for example, if one computer went down, it has a way of reconstructing the data. That's kind of the idea. So you could think of lots and lots of data with lots of different computers, and if one goes down, Elastic automatically kind of readjusts where files are, where the redundancy is, and then kind of establishes that the database is working with one less node. Okay, so we've done that, and I might as well add the ingredients one as well, so we don't have to come back to this. So let's go back to our dev tools. Get rid of this command because we don't need it. We'll now go to our inventory, very similar. Execute it. Acknowledge true. That's good. And what's important, what's different, are the properties. So the inventory mapping has things, it has the identifier, but it's got a category name and whether it's in stock. So I'm defining these different fields. So if you look at that, the in stock is going to be true or false, yes or no. And then we'll just have a name, so it's not very complicated. In the category, whether this is spices, dairy, fruits, etc., etc. So I've acknowledged that. Okay, so I've done this. I can get rid of that. So now if we go back to our index management, we should see inventory in here as well. So now we've got the basis for which we can now store records into our database. Okay, so we're at the 20-minute mark. That's probably enough for now. And then the next video will actually import some factory setting type data, some basically 9 recipes, and then what corresponds to my inventory. What we'll do eventually is allow the user to be able to add their own recipes, delete them, add their own, their own inventory, etc. But needed some data to get started. And so I will show you how to do this in what's called bulk mode, programmatically. I'm not going to be using this tool to import them. It works very, very, you can use a large amount of data and it imports them pretty fast if you use the bulk mode in the Elasticsearch interface. So let's see. What we're also going to do is I'll show you a way that we can create our own API that can access this data. And this will be considered a REST API. So we can pull down all the records from the inventory or the recipe, and it'll be in JSON format. And then that JSON will be then converted to our web pages into a very nice format. So until next time, happy computing.